Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Price Formation Enhancements Scarcity Pricing meeting. Today, we will be covering a few housekeeping reminders as this call is being recorded for informational and communities purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. In this meeting, we encourage all stakeholders to participate and engage in dialogue and different perspectives as we encourage both comments to be professional, respectful. At this time, we definitely want to ask folks to not repeat anything that has been previously said. We could definitely work on that offline to ask any other questions that have been asked during the meeting. During this call, you will be able to ask a question using the WebEx raise hand located in the middle lower screen. When you raise your hand, make sure you keep it raised at the time your hand is unmuted. Please make sure you state your full name and affiliation. That way we know who's speaking. If you do submit any questions in the chat, please be able to add your full name and affiliation as well in case we are able to track those questions and say them out loud to our audience. As well, today in this meeting, Ahmed is our event producer. He'll be helping us in the background. But if you do experience any technical issues, let us know. During this call, we do have the Interteller Transparency Viewer that can be accessed throughout the meeting. To refresh it, you'll click the blue refresh button to check the most latest list. And also during this call, this recording will be posted about 3 to 4 business days onto the Price Formation Enhancements webpage that's located under the kaiso.com under Stakeholder Center. At this time, our agenda, I will go ahead and speak on the agenda because we did a few modifications on here. First is we'll be kicking off with James Frederick, who is our lead policy developer, on 2 slides. One is the initiative status as well the proposed trajectory for PFE. We also have Danny Johnson here. He's also the manager for our policy development team. He'll be here for the ISO team for answering the other questions. After James, we'll go to Steve Keene from SCE. He'll cover his slide from his organization. And then after that, we'll go back to James to follow up on a more slide about our PFE and other items he's planning to discuss for scarcity pricing and problem statements. And once James is able to finalize the last few slides of his presentation, we'll pass it on to Callie Wells from WPTF, and she will be presenting on hers as well. So we plan to give about 20 minutes for each speaker for the stakeholder, for Callie, Steve, but we'll adjust accordingly if there's any more questions. And also feel free to raise your hand so we can ask those questions for natural pauses throughout the meeting. At this time, we'll go ahead and introduce James to this and make sure his audio is working as well.
Audio check.
Check. Great.
Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. We have a full agenda today, so let's get right into it. So in August 22nd of this year, the California ISO published a straw proposal that was a culmination of work undertaken through the Price Formation Enhancements Working Group in 2 phases over the last several months. And that resulted in policy proposed for BAA level market power mitigation and scarcity pricing. The ISO held public stakeholder meetings on September 3rd and 4th, 2025, and took formal comments on those proposals. Overall, as it relates to the scarcity pricing proposals, the stakeholder perspectives were mixed on CAISO's plan, ultimately in the proposal to delay a comprehensive scarcity pricing design and instead only propose more near-term incremental changes to pricing during tight system conditions. Because of these mixed views, the CAISO is planning to, starting with today's working group session, to restart discussions within the working group setting on comprehensive scarcity pricing design for the Western Energy Imbalance Market and future EDAM. Next slide, please. So here is the sort of a visual of the way that we perceive the price formation enhancements policy development to move forward. The slide is read visually from left to right. We start on the leftmost node, which is the straw proposal that was published in August. And essentially what we envision is that we're going to move the policy development for price formation on two separate tracks, ultimately in the end to come back together for a combined governance decision. So if you follow first on the bottom slide, or the bottom track contains essentially discussions of more comprehensive scarcity pricing. So you see the first node there being resume working group discussions on comprehensive scarcity pricing design, with the goal of coming up with a revised straw proposal specifically on a comprehensive scarcity pricing option that culminates from the work done in these working group discussions. And then, iterations of that revised straw proposal as needed until we form a draft final proposal for a comprehensive scarcity pricing design. On the top track, we'll continue with the proposals as proposed in the straw proposal, including the BA level market power and potentially the scarcity pricing options that are already in the proposal. And so we're not sure yet whether or not, depending on how these discussions go in the comprehensive scarcity pricing discussions, whether or not those the two proposals in there are still needed or will still be needed. But in any case, we will assume they will be for now and continue to refine and work on the policy development for BA level market power mitigation and those limited scarcity pricing options within a separate proposal track. So we do plan to start that track with some analysis specifically on BA level market power. And then once that is finished, we will be able to, we think, move into a draft final proposal for the BA level market power in the limited scarcity pricing options. And then once, essentially, we would expect that since the BA level market power mitigation discussion and those limited scarcity pricing options are further along in their design, we expect that we would continue to making progress in parallel on both of these tracks simultaneously. But our expectation is that the BA level market power and the policy that's already been proposed in the straw proposal will reach the draft final proposal stage earlier than the comprehensive scarcity pricing design. And then if that's true, we would essentially hold the draft final proposal and move forward as far as we can with the comprehensive scarcity pricing design, with the idea that once both draft final proposals for both tracks are complete, then we can reconvene them into a final proposal that combines elements of both tracks and take that to, essentially we would plan to take that for a governance decision as a package, and then if approved by the relevant governing bodies, then taken to FERC for joint filing. So again, the idea here is that we want to be able to make some space within the working groups to have these discussions on comprehensive scarcity pricing and move that forward without necessarily sitting back on the policy development that we've already put forth in the straw proposal. So again, to summarize, we would break them into two different parallel tracks, making progress on each as we go along, with the ultimate goal of recombining them at the end and taking them for governance decision as a package. And again, all of this is subject to feedback, and we would like to hear feedback. Also, each node as we go along, we will sort of reassess, whether we're making good progress on the policy development. There may be some steps that are skipped because we're progressing so rapidly, or there may be extra steps needed along the way. But this provides at least just a high-level description of what that would look like. So before we have any sort of substantive discussion about scarcity pricing today, I just wanted to pause and see if there's any feedback on the two slides I just presented. or
Let's go
questions.
ahead and take, yeah, let's go ahead and take the first hand. Please be sure to introduce yourself.
I'm assuming I'm the first hand. This is Jonathan Rumble from Southern California, Edison. Can you just help us understand a little bit better why this needs to go in as a package?
Well, we think that there are some synergies with the designs insofar that what we're trying to accomplish is pricing under tight system conditions that reflects real scarcity and not artificial scarcity constrained by market power or economic withholding. And so for those reasons, we think that they form a nice sort of synergy. But that being said, insofar as there are more compelling reasons to keep them separated, we're open to that feedback as well.
So, but previously, I don't know, a month ago, there wasn't a contemplated package, right? It was just going to, the top track was what was on track for the governance decision. So something changed.
Correct. Yeah. So in the Straw proposal, the proposals only included, these near-term incremental approaches or new rules for scarcity pricing or pricing under tight system conditions. And the idea here is that, through the working group series, we had contemplated more comprehensive scarcity pricing design. And initially, the ISO thought it best to delay that decision until other things work themselves out. But the stakeholder feedback has caused us to reconsider that delay and at least have the opportunity here within the separate working group track to have those discussions on a comprehensive scarcity pricing design. And insofar as those discussions are working out well and the development is carrying along nicely, then you'll probably see the things play out like this slide shows. But again, this is a snapshot in time as of right now. Every new opportunity to reconvene comes with it, assessment of how things are going and needing to reassess the trajectory as we go. And so, it's very possible this is not what the future holds for us, but this is at least the plan that we're striving for.
Okay.
Next, we have Bonnie. Please be sure to introduce yourself. Thank you. I wasn't sure if Jay Rumble was good. I think we were good with his question. Sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead, Bonnie. Sorry.
I don't want to preface that too much, but I didn't want the opportunity to comment on the plan to kind of go by without commenting. And without getting into the details of the joint LSC presentation, I think this is kind of two steps back and not a good plan. I echo Jonathan's view that we were better off with the plan that was described a month or 6 weeks ago, and the presentation will go into that in more detail.
Thanks for the feedback.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. Next, we do have Todd Ryan, PG and E.
Hi, good afternoon. Todd Ryan with Pacific Gas and Electric. I'd like to echo Bonnie and John's comments. This plan does not make sense to me. We've been having stakeholder meetings since, I believe, 2022 on this topic and did not seem to be moving forward significantly on comprehensive scarcity pricing. It does not feel like the right time to move forward with comprehensive scarcity pricing, given where we are in the development of EDAM and regionalization. You mentioned some stakeholders opposing the plan and the straw proposal, but I think there was significant support as well. So let me voice again PG&E's support for this straw proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.
And next we do have Seth Cochran from VTOL. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's Seth with VTOL. I appreciate what Kaisa is doing here. I want to offer VTOL's perspective. We think there are improvements that can be made. Ultimately, any proposals that we review and look at aren't going to go in tomorrow. So I would expect that EDM would be well on its way at that point in time. I don't see that as a reason to impede developments and enhancing price formation. To its ultimate conclusion, if we just stop doing everything because of EDM, then we're just stuck in a market design stasis where the market never evolves. And that's certainly what I don't think anyone here should want. So I applaud Kaisa for giving this review. I look forward to participating in it. And I guess I won't belabor the point. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Seth.
I want to go back to Callie. Sorry, Callie. I just saw your hand. She was next. You can go ahead and mute yourself, Callie.
Hi, thanks. It's Callie Wells with WPTF. I'll just echo Seth's perspective there as well. I really appreciate the CAISO responding to stakeholders and going back and revisiting this comprehensive scarcity pricing design. It's kind of what the plan was since 2020, was to look at scarcity pricing comprehensively. And I think the piece that we'll be talking about today is a fundamental element of that. So we appreciate you guys going back and considering that in this track.
Thank you, Callie.
We do have Steve Keen from SCE next.
Hi, this is Steve from Edison. I have a question. Comments that have already been made by Jonathan and others. There's no dates suggested on this. Maybe I missed it if you said it, but do you have is there a potential timing on this?
That is $1 million question, of course. We left dates off purposely, and the reason being is that it's very difficult for us to project exactly how long. We want to be moving forward in the policy development process in a way that brings people along, but doesn't, sort of step over people at the same time. And it's a really, really difficult balance and each initiative sort of has its own organic pace, I would say. And for those reasons, it made us nervous to, at this stage, commit to or even try to project necessarily for any of these proposals, any sort of date. I can tell you for the enhanced BA MPM analysis, we do expect that sometime around the end of the month to early December, and we're working on that right now. So I can tell you that. And the draft final proposal for the BA level MPM and limited scarcity pricing options would likely follow, depending on how the analysis goes and the ensuing discussion, would likely follow quite shortly after that. So roughly near the end of the year towards the beginning of 2026. So I hope that's better than nothing, but outside of that, it is quite difficult to, and we think not really that useful to try to project out, much farther than that.
Okay,
I hope
thanks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We could go back to Todd for his follow-up question or comment. Todd Ryan, PG&E.
Yeah, just one follow-up. There was a comment that made it sound like we were suggesting we stop talking about this altogether, and I don't think that was my intention. So my apologies if that was what it sounded like. My concern is that there's not going to be productive conversations on comprehensive scarcity pricing given where we are in the next year, and given that we have a lot to accomplish and a lot to implement. It doesn't seem like the best use of our stakeholder time, in my opinion, to be spending more time talking about comprehensive scarcity pricing in addition to the 3 years we've already spent. So what I would suggest is that we move forward with the straw proposal incremental enhancements and delay further conversation of comprehensive scarcity pricing for a future date.
Thank you, Todd.
Next, we do have Sybil. Confirm.
Hi, this is Sybil from PGP. Just wanted to echo some of the concerns from others about if we saw some very positive steps in the right direction included in the straw proposal, and potential areas to enhance that further with relatively hopefully aggressive timeline for implementing some of those changes, particularly in the areas of emergency management. And so we have a lot of concerns about if resuming these comprehensive scarcity design proposals is going to delay some of the identified and agreed upon progress for sort of addressing the low-hanging fruit. That doesn't seem like a good direction from our perspective, and not to discourage ongoing conversations on the more robust design, but just that we saw a lot of potential benefits for implementing some of those immediate changes, both in the VA power mitigation and the scarcity limited proposals sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thanks, Sybil. And actually, that's an interesting point, because maybe that's something that we can sort of solicit some feedback directly on, because this proposed trajectory assumes that the finished product of both tracks comes together and culminates in a governance decision. But insofar as the stakeholder group would rather see, if you finish one track, should we take it for decision and file it even if the other track is lagging behind? Or should you wait until you take them together and do it all as one package? I think if I could just offer some perspective, I think it just kind of depends how quickly the delay might be. And so it could be one of those things where we sort of wait to see how the conversation in this lower track progresses. And if it's getting to the point where it seems like it's not moving fast enough, where, it's an unacceptable amount of time in between, when the upper track's proposal development is sort of polished and ready to go, you don't want to be hanging on to it too long. So I think that's an interesting question. I think hopefully people will consider, and perhaps we can, in setting up some feedback to this call, we can include that in the, some comment template for people to respond to. I also want to point out that we are in the process, the CAISO is on the process of reviewing the 2026 catalog and roadmap process. And so insofar as there is interest in just stakeholder priorities in general, in what initiatives we're working on at what times, that's another good venue to be participating in, because, we do have some movement within price formation, the bubble of price formation itself, to figure out how things are prioritized within here. The roadmap and catalog process is sort of more of an ultimate tool about how the ISO is prioritizing different initiatives among each other. And so I do encourage folks to be participating in that as well, and providing their feedback in that process to make sure the ISO is receiving this feedback in all the venues that it can make a difference.
I do see Sybil has her follow-up question on there.
Sorry, just a follow-up on that, and thanks for noting that these conversations are happening in multiple places at once. I do feel like, you know, there was this particular initiative was sort of basically on pause over the last couple of months while those conversations on finalizing the roadmap are occurring. And I think now it feels a bit like we're having a significant change in plans after a period of time where folks were thinking that we were on a certain track and maybe not weighing in heavily on directional items along these lines for the roadmap. So just noting it feels a little disjoint with the idea of the roadmap process when we have this occurring sort of in a separate conversation. I didn't get the impression that the feedback in the roadmap process was to do a significant change in course on this. And so again, just noting that it feels a little disconnected from that here, but I can see how folks could raise that in that process as well at this point, theoretically, even though it's pretty late in the game for that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sybil.
So I don't see any further questions. I did provide those links to the annual policy roadmap on the chat and also the straw proposal for those who want to reference it. Thank you.
That's it for slide 7, Brenda. We can go ahead and move forward.
All right, Steve, are you ready? I see you on camera. Let's check your audio. Okay, I can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Some of the thunder of this presentation has been kind of stolen by some of the comments already. And this is actually follow up kind of to a comment letter that we submitted to the WEAM governing body. At least most of these entities. We've added a couple new entities on this, but you can see this presentation is not just on behalf of Edison. I'm obviously from Edison, but I'm speaking on behalf of this whole group of joint LSEs, and they make up the majority of the load serving entities in California. So this is not, you know, it's a fairly large group that's doing it. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just the key points here, and I'm sure most of you are probably aware of these. The joint LSEs support the incremental improvements identified in the CAISO straw proposal. So this was the stuff on track 1, or on the upper track on that previous slide. The kind of simple, I think someone described it as the low-hanging fruit. We agree that you know, those should go. But now is not the time to undertake comprehensive price formation reforms. And you know, adding additional scarcity pricing mechanisms, if these are going to be considered, they should be addressed after the implementation of an experience with DAME and EDAM. I mean, that's one of the things that's going on right now is, you know, the market sim for DAME and EDAM. And last week we had a couple days worth of workshops on some implementation aspects of how DAME and EDAM will work. And I think there's still a lot of questions on that. And until we kind of have an idea of exactly how it's going to work, I don't think we should be trying to make, you know, we don't think we should be trying to make any kind of a comprehensive pricing mechanism, scarcity pricing mechanism. And we go to the next slide, please. So basically, this is the point we're trying to make. We're not ready for larger changes. You know, first, a scarcity pricing mechanism, most of the ones that have been discussed are based on ancillary services. And that would be limited to just the CAISO balancing area. at least until ancillary services optimization is broadened. So if you want to talk about doing a comprehensive mechanism that's based on ancillary services, that would need to wait until all parts of EDAM are optimizing their ancillary services through the market. That's kind of the second point here too. Until ancillary services are co-optimized across the regional footprint, making changes to that has the potential to create a number of unintended consequences or other issues, and we're very concerned about that, obviously. And right now, the last bullet is, some of these things have suggested potentially putting out a new reserve product, but right now we're trying to introduce a new reserve product with DAME, imbalance reserves, and until the implications of that are fully understood, and until we're certain it's working properly, I don't think we want to be making other changes to how the market is functioning. Go to the next slide, please. We also don't see that there's any urgent need for comprehensive scarcity pricing reform. Right, a lot of the presentations of other parties that have suggested this, they talk about it's needed to encourage investment in new resources. Well, that seems to be a little bit of a red herring at this point, because since the 2020 scarcity events, the CAISO has integrated 13 gigawatts worth of storage capacity and other resources as well. There's currently a substantial volume of new resources that are seeking interconnection in the CAISO queue. So it doesn't seem to be the fact that there's nothing, that resources aren't coming online because they're not seeing the value of that. It seems that they are coming online. And the one other thing I think that hasn't been mentioned that is an important consideration here is that within the CAISO, at least, we have resource adequacy. And the resource adequacy that we have here provides for must offer obligations from those resources in exchange for capacity payments. In other words, we've solved, or the compact kind of in the CAISO markets has been that the resources receive upfront payments, the capacity payments, and then they accept a must offer obligation. And because resource adequacy is designed to ensure there are sufficient resources for even peak periods, okay, then we shouldn't need to see scarcity pricing should not, extremely high prices should not be necessary. That's the trade-off we've made here, is that the resources receive those payments, upfront payments to capacity. And I think as the first two sub-bullets here make clear, this has been a fairly successful way of doing it. Yes, we had some issues in 2020, but now, that's pretty much been corrected both through the RA program and through other things. And then, the extended day-ahead markets are going to provide significant reliability benefits to EDAM participants and to the CAISO balancing authority area. And until we know what those are going to be, until we see how this is working out, how things are impacted by the larger market, it's premature to consider additional changes, especially given the potential for the unintended consequences and inequitable cost allocation, given that this likely would not apply equally across all the different EDAM balancing authority areas. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the summary and recommended next steps. And I think you heard from some of my colleagues some of the recommended next steps. But this is just to review quickly. We should move forward with the consideration of the incremental scarcity pricing measures identified in the straw proposal. Stakeholders noted data needs in the comments. Focus should be here on assessment and refinement of the straw proposal elements. But as we said, those should be, we can move forward with that. Moving forward, potentially, move forward with the market power mitigation proposal. So the two things on that, the top of that timeline, that should go forward. But at this point, we think we should postpone discussions of comprehensive scarcity pricing changes until we see what comes with the DAME and EDAM market implementation and experience. Right? It's kind of hard to try and craft some kind of a comprehensive scarcity pricing to a market that we don't know exactly how it's going to function at this point. So our recommendation is to postpone those discussions for at least a year until we have some operating experience with EDAM and DAME. And that, then, if we still want to have that kind of discussion, we'll be in a better position. We'll be in a better position to understand how the different BAAs would be involved and how they would be affected. So that last point in red is what is the one that Todd made earlier. Further discussions of scarcity pricing in 2026 would not be a productive use of either the CAISO or stakeholders' time. Right? It's whatever we discuss and decide may end up changing once we see how DAME and EDAM, how that implementation works and what comes out of that. All right, I think there's one more slide, but I think it should just be the, it's questions. So we'll open it up for questions at this point. And again, I'm speaking for the group, but I welcome comments from any of the other people and help with any questions from that group as well.
Thank you, Seth. Always thank you, Steve. Sorry. We have Seth Cochran next from VTOL.
Seth with VTOL. This is Seth with VTOL. I think when I think about this, it's not necessarily about increasing prices or creating a higher price at the high end, at the top end. It's really about gradual pricing and having the prices actually reflect the reserve capacity that's on the system. So today it can be rather binary, and we can actually get ourselves into situations where you're not getting the operational behaviors that you would want prior to the scarcity condition, and you find yourself in it absent the fact that you didn't have the gradual pricing that drives behaviors leading you up to scarcity that could prevent it. I think that there's sort of this narrative going on that this translates into higher prices. It's actually about operational efficiency in real time. And then moreover, the interaction with the RA market is just that, it would be preserved. So if you have a situation where you were driving more rents into the real-time market, then the capacity market has less missing money to fill in. And you don't have a higher cost overall, you just have a more rational price in real time that's actually, again, driving these operational efficiencies. And it doesn't mean that you don't need, just because you have an RA market doesn't mean that you should not try to seek that. So, in a nutshell, I think that we really need to think about having prices reflect the supply-demand balance in the system, much like what we see in some of the other RTOs and ISOs, whereas the gradual pricing mechanisms in CAISO have a very limited role in price formation. And I think that's what we need to address. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to respond on a couple things there. I think, and at least as I understand resource adequacy, the units have a must offer obligation. So I question exactly how much additional output you're going to get from resources when the prices are higher. If the price is anything above the unit's marginal cost, that should provide significant That should provide enough incentive for them to be online, combined with the must offer obligation that they have. And I think, you know, that's somewhat the trade-off that we've made here in California with resource adequacy, is that we're expecting them, you know, to be there. So I don't know how much extra would be there. Obviously, you know, units that aren't RA or something might come in, but again, I don't know how much we would get if it's, you know, if prices are over their marginal cost. The other thing I think to think about that is if you're talking about prices going up in real time, it's like that there's a concern there as to, you know, how fast people can respond, because you have to put your bids in, you know, well ahead of the real time hour. So if prices start going up, I don't know that units can actually respond to that. And I think those are things that have to be considered in this discussion as well.
So those are all valid questions, but you're focused on the supply side. There's also a demand side on all of this, whether it's active or passive demand response. That's very much a part of this equation and things that we need to think about. So I understand, you know, generation has startup times, and some generations may be limited in being able to quickly respond to price signals that may be occurring in real time to avoid these scarcity conditions. But that is not necessarily the case on the demand side. So we could see a more robust load side participation as a result of this. And moreover, as you look out into the future, there'd be an incentive for new entry of quick start generation and batteries, more batteries. Units that can, well, in batteries case, they're always online. In the quick start scenario, you know, they can have very short start times. But, you know, I think we also, you know, thinking about this another way, also batteries is also a very big part of this, and having the right signals for the charge and discharge signals.
Okay.
All right. I don't know if Seth still has a follow-up. It kind of muted. Let's unmute him just to make sure, because his hand is still raised.
Yeah, can you
Go ahead. It was a
hear
little
me
bit
okay?
raspy. A little bit, yeah. Now we can.
Okay, now you can. I was just going to say that, you know, we also have to focus on the demand side of this. I mean, side resources have startup times. So the price signals, when they occur, you may not see the response right away because they may have a startup time that would preclude them from coming online right away. Now, I would note that is not the case with batteries. They are always online. So when you really think about operational behaviors, I think you have to focus on the load side, and you have to focus on batteries and setting the right signals for charging and discharging. I think that if we have the right pricing constructs in place, we would see us move more towards a market signal based approach, where we wouldn't have to worry as much about whether or not the batteries will be there to discharge during the net load peaks, because the prices will reflect the reliability value of that discharge at that point in time. So I also think there's a component here that would allow CAISO and its operators to rely less on out-of-market actions to manage batteries in their state of charge.
Hey, Steve,
And
you're on mute.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to say is that these types of questions, you know, like the questions about batteries. Well, I mean, one thing I would ask: aren't most batteries going to get RA contracts, so they already have to be there? And I understand your pricing issues, and I think that's a very important question. But is that resolved here, or is that resolved in the storage stakeholder process, where they're trying to figure out how to manage storage in the market? I guess what I'm saying with that is a targeted solution for storage might be a better answer.
Hey, Seth, you're still unmuted if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, I mean,
If not, okay.
yeah, I can, and thanks for letting me have this opportunity to respond. You're correct. I mean, batteries are always available, so it's not a matter of being available unless they're on maintenance or something like that. But you know, they are always available in real time. There's no startup time or anything like that. What I'm more referring to is the temporal constraints with their state of charge, and having the price signals in real time send the correct signals and efficient price signals for them to operate most efficiently when the reliability need is there, and that is reflected through the prices. So, you know, it's very much about them being able to have the price signals that allow them to operate their state of charge in the most efficient way according to the reliability needs on the system. That's what I'm really trying to say. It's the real-time operational horizon. It's really not about must offers and things like that. They're always available. They're ready to capture the value in the market. It's more about having the price signals that are aligned as they do that are aligned with the reliability value that they're providing.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Dawn.
Clients. Steve, thanks for summarizing the joint LSC's comments. I just have a couple of comments. The first is around this co-optimization of AS. I would note that CISA has never advocated for that as an appropriate way to do a scarcity pricing design. You know, that's an instance where you've entered scarcity, not prevented it. And so there's always been the need for the scarcity pricing design to relax something so that it gets the price formation that you want. And that's why we've used the term latent reserves, which is, I think, very similar to terminology that Scott Harvey uses. It's basically equivalent to what WPTF advocates in terms of the energy supply margin. So I think there isn't this need, the fact that there isn't AS procured outside of the CAISO, that means that you're going to create some scarcity pricing design that's not equivalently applied across the entire EDAM footprint. And CISA wouldn't support a scarcity pricing design that is applied only across a portion of the EDAM footprint. And I would note that some of the interim solutions that are in the top of the lines actually do that. So, you know, I think that's the saying that we don't want to look at an actual, you know, scarcity pricing design and saying it's because of AS co-optimization is just a little bit of a red herring in my book. The next thing is with regards to the RA and the must offer obligation. You know, you're correct that the fact that CAISO and the CPUC have developed a resource adequacy program that has a must offer obligation, that in essence, you've ensured that all the supply that's contracted to CAISO is you know, bidding into the market. But scarcity pricing is there for when that becomes insufficient. You know, we're not procuring to a 100% probability that we could always serve load. And so you need scarcity pricing to attract non-RA supply to the CAISO market, not retain the RA through the MOOT. And so, you know, that's what we saw on the 20th. One of the issues was not attracting more supply, and in fact, supporting exports out of the CAISO system. And then just my last comment is around, you know, CISA has never felt that you should couple system market power and scarcity pricing. We found that argument sort of foolish. But what's surprising, I think, in the position of the joint LSEs is that you're highlighting the fact that there's 13 gigawatts of new storage resources that have been added since the 2020 events. And that justifies not having or prioritizing or working through scarcity pricing. But yet, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you still support applying system market power to the CAISO balancing authority area by including it in the grouping methodology and deeming it uncompetitive. So I don't see how those are you know, looking at the same data and having a similar conclusion. But thanks again, Steve, for summarizing everything. And I'd be happy to respond if you have any questions or thoughts.
No, I think I understand your points, and I think we just differ on some of them, but. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next, we have Todd Ryan.
Hi, this is Todd Ryan with PG&E again. I think in some ways we agree on the challenges and the need for need for improvement on the operations side. What I think what's the challenge is that we're just disagreeing on when the timing should occur. And while some people are making good points about, well, maybe we don't need co-optimization of ancillary services in order to do scarcity pricing. The reason we bring that up as part of the joint LLC's presentation is that many of the proposals have been around changing the reserve demand curve. And it doesn't feel appropriate, given that we're in regional markets, to have significant differences in the scarcity mechanism between the CAISO balancing area and other participants in the regional market. So yes, Dan mentioned maybe other ways of doing it, like a reserve product. And it's, again, not that we're against exploring this, it's that we've already explored this and we feel it's inappropriate to do a new reserve product while we're still waiting for imbalance reserves to change. So it's not that we're against any one of these ideas or against the need for operational improvements. It's just, given the dozen other things we need to juggle next year, it doesn't feel like we should continue to tread water for another year on these discussions. So again, it's not that we disagree with any one of these points. Is that we disagree that the best use of our time in 2026 is spending time discussing this.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, here's an example, okay? One of the things going on, the existing RA contracts in California don't mention imbalance reserves. So entities are trying to figure out, once imbalance reserves come in and there are, the requirements to actually bid for imbalance reserves, how does that impact the RA contracts? And, part of that discussion, I think what most people would say with that is, well, it's going to depend on how much revenue is where. Then we don't know how much revenue is going to be coming out of the IR market. I don't think anybody has any good idea of what that will be. And until we see that, it's going to be hard to even redo some of these RA contracts. So trying to add another product in while we're still trying to figure out the one that's coming in now is just going to be really hard. Are we ready for the next question?
Yes, I think, well, let's go to Kathleen.
Hi, great. Thank you. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Can you hear me? Could you confirm, Brenda?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. No, I also appreciate, so I'll say I really do appreciate this presentation because I think the joint LLC, I think you've given us an opportunity to see where there's some miscommunication occurring in this process. I will say it's kind of funny to me. I was trying to look back at just some of my own comments, and there were some from 2023, and I can't recall if we launched the working groups in 2022, but it helped remind me how long we've been having this conversation just in the price formation enhancements effort, let alone all the years before that when we were having a similar, summer 2021 reliability. And then before that, we were talking about it in different venues. And I haven't tried to follow those breadcrumbs all the way back, but I did in the context of this effort. It was helpful for me to remind myself that, man, it's been a long time that we've been having these conversations, and it also doesn't really feel like the ball has moved forward at all. And so I've internally been kind of trying to figure out why. Like why does it feel like we're having the same conversations, but we're not making progress? And I wanted to thank you for the presentation, because I think it helps at least me kind of see why a little bit better, and I wanted to add that to the conversation. I agree with everything Seth Cochran said. I agree with everything Don Trethewey said. I support others that have made comments, but I want to add something rather than repeat. So the first thing I think that you're highlighting is, like, one thing I keep hearing you talk about, a new product. I know we've put forward proposals. I've listened to other people's proposals around how we might improve scarcity design. And I'll be honest, I have never heard of a new product. So if the LFEs are hearing of a product, but yet folks who are thinking about scarcity design know that that's not introducing a new product, there's a huge miscommunication occurring. And just to give an example, like, when we talk about scarcity, or when I talk about scarcity design, I'm just honestly thinking about the nuts and bolts of an optimization problem, where there are certain constraints in that, and we need to make sure that the results of that math problem are accurate. I want the integrity of the solution to make sense. And when I'm talking about improvements to scarcity, maybe that's the bad language, and I will think of different words if they make everyone more comfortable. But what I mean is, I would like the prices that come out of the market optimization software to be accurate and to be a reasonable reflection of the actual risks that the system could incur if the system needs are not met. And that's a pricing design question. It is not a product. So when I say I would like the prices to reflect that there's dwindling supply, such that there is an increased risk of entering, let's say, an EEA watch, that is a physical operational concern that I am scared could occur. And because I have a rational fear about adverse operational outcomes, I believe a good market releases a price that reflects that risk of a potential failure to meet the needs. Now, if it's not really moved into an emergency condition, we shouldn't be pricing at the upper bounds of our scarcity, right? We should be indicating there is an increased risk such that a risk adder needs to be materialized in the pricing, but it's not a guaranteed risk. It's something that we could still correct, or it's something actions could be taken. And so you would see it as not 100%, right? The probability of that event occurring is not 100%, but the probability of that event occurring gets increasingly higher as we get closer and closer to not meeting our energy or ancillary service needs. And so that's not a product. That's how you price risk in the instance that you may not have sufficient economic offers to set an economic price that reflects that risk. And I'll just pause for a second. I had one other thing that I noticed is a miscommunication, but I'm happy to hear a response from Steve or Todd, but I think this is a core miscommunication if you think we're talking about a product and not a price.
Okay, and if we're talking about the price, I mean, the justification for increasing the prices is that it would bring in more supply. I think that's
Actually,
something.
my justification, honestly, Steve, would be I want to see participating load. It's not about bringing in more supply. Load serving entities ideally have participating load within their own portfolios. And you would be looking at that and going, okay, there's insufficient supply potentially to meet my load. At what point do I want to change my behavior to now serve the grid, to do good utility practice?
We have to talk about that because load doesn't bid in real time. Yes, they can cut their.
We do
load, but,
have
it's
demand. Actually, we do have demand response in real time. We also have storage charging bids, which is participating load. We also have participating hydro, which is also participating load. And to be perfectly honest, I believe the DR program is discussing how there could be more participating load in real time as well.
Okay, but these periods you're talking about when we're in, getting close to an EEA period, I really don't think storage is going to be charging at that point.
Well, I love that you think that.
Even when prices get up to something like $200.
But I've charged at over $1,500. So I love that you think that. But to be honest, Steve, that's not how the market works. And that's why we, on the storage side, get so concerned that we have the right prices in the market and we have the right bids. This was my second miscommunication I think I heard you say. So there's two places that the storage community has been told to participate to fix what have been challenges where we have charged at significantly high prices. It's largely, so one of the main challenges we have is the real-time market horizon is too short. The other main challenge we have is that CAISO mitigates and the prices that it mitigates at are not a good reflection of real time. So yes, storage has absolutely felt the burn and the pain of having to pay scarcity to charge. That's how the market functions sometimes when we're in those tight days. And if we were going to be discharged at a higher price, that's a positive charge spread, and that might be optimal. But I really encourage you not to assume storage isn't charging, because on certain days we've absolutely seen that. So we've been told to participate in two efforts. This effort is supposed to be addressing the pricing issue. The storage effort is supposed to be addressing the fact that we're being overly mitigated. But I don't think we can have an optimal use of storage operationally around our stated charge management unless we have both the fact that we are not going to be overly mitigated and we make sure that the bids that we submit are going to be triggered or deployed for our market results based on prices that actually indicate real-time condition needs.
Okay.
And I appreciate the chance to kind of explain. I see there's a lot of miscommunication. Maybe I'll just make a pitch to the CAISO. It's been years, and if we are cross-talking this much in this effort, perhaps we need to rethink the formats and do some in-person meetings, do some tabletops, but there's definitely a bridge that needs to be narrowed, and I hope we can find a way forward. Thanks.
Okay, we do have more questions. I just want to do a quick time check. Great. So
Yeah,
I think
we can keep proceeding. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Todd Ryan is next.
Yeah, hi, Kathleen. I really appreciate your comments. I mean, am I crazy, or did we did talk about flexible ramping, changes to flexible ramping product, like a longer duration flexible ramping product as another means of getting quote unquote accurate pricing. And so I don't think we're talking past each other. I think we don't we don't disagree with any of the proposals or need for changes to improve operations and improve ability for load or storage to participate real time. But I mean, unless maybe we can talk offline, but the two primary mechanisms that I hear, that I understand that people are talking about for comprehensive scarcity pricing reform are changes to the reserve demand curve and new products. And so if there's a third way that I missed, maybe we can continue talking about it, but those both seem inappropriate to be messing with at the moment, given where we are, right? Like, for example, if we can mess with the reserve demand curve any more than we already have, wouldn't that create the possibility of, say, another EDAM participant who's going into scarcity, for that scarcity signal to truly show up in their balancing area? It would have to go through the CAISO balancing area scarcity pricing mechanism or power balance constraints in order to like truly show up in that EDAM footprint. And that doesn't seem appropriate to have to go through the CAISO balancing areas mechanism in order for that scarcity signal to truly show up. So, you know, it's not that we disagree with the need, it's that we've spent 3 years, agreed we kind of feel stuck. Let's move forward with what improvements we can make in the near term and wait for a better opportunity to do comprehensive reforms. So I'd be, you know, happy to discuss further.
Thank you, Todd. I don't think Steve has a comment, but we'll keep that in mind. Appreciate it. We're going to have to move forward. Dan Williams, do you have a quick question or comment for Steve's presentation?
Yeah, just a quick reflection. This is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority, and that's just that I want to support what Kathleen was saying, that I do feel like in this initiative and in some others recently that there has been this kind of lack of grounding in what role some different entities within our greater marketplace play in the market and how things have been changing over time in, you know, RA contracting, import contracting, these new products that are coming in. And when we look out 2 or 3 years down the road, when this changes might be implemented, what kind of markets and resources we're going to have at that point. And I would support some effort to try and bring a little bit of this conversation out. We're 14 sessions in, back to like, where are we going and what do we need when we get there? Because I don't want us to constrain solutions based on old, you know, maybe old contracts or, you know, overpaying someone because we signed up for something in a time when we didn't expect different value streams to be there. At the same time, no one's looking for, I don't think, out of the supplier community is looking for windfall profits to come out of some exceptionally high prices. They're just looking forward and trying to get you know, better outcomes from the market solution and then incorporate that into the overall cost of contracting with entities and, you know, trying to improve the way that markets function there. So I've enjoyed the discussion so far. Look forward to what's coming next, and just encourage more talking and trying to understand each other a little better.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Dan. And Michaela has a quick comment. Go ahead, Michaela. Please provide your affiliation.
Michaela Flack, Customized Energy Solutions. I was wondering, maybe this is like just a thought experiment, but one argument for like scarcity pricing or price formation enhancements that I've heard can stem from the fact that the footprint doesn't have a single like RA requirement or RA system. So the fact that, you know, we can rely on the RA you know, construct for the must offers and for the supply to be available, but there are still concerns about maybe leaning amongst different jurisdictions, and that, you know, like scarcity pricing, kind of when it all comes like to real time, can be a bit of an equalizer. So I was just curious what the LSCs thought about that, since I think even within the group there are different RA programs.
Yeah, within a group, yes, there are different RA programs because they're put forward by the local regulatory authority, but everyone within CAISO has a requirement for RA, and those resources have a must offer requirement. So one of the things I think that we were seeing is it seems kind of, when we look at like changing the reserve demand curve, which affects the CAISO more than anybody else, that just seems kind of strange considering the CAISO is also the only entity right now that really has resource adequacy with a must offer requirement. So you have, it's kind of like you're addressing this problem in the non-CAISO BAAs by imposing price increases in CAISO, which is the one area where, we've tried to handle it in a different manner. So it just doesn't seem, like a good way to go at it to us.
All right, thank you, Steve. I don't see any other questions at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Callie. Just quick audio check to make sure you're ready for your presentation.
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Okay. And you'll drive the slides?
Yes, I will.
Okay, I'll just let you know. Thank you. Okay, so I'm Callie Wells. I'm a co-founder and senior partner at Gridwell Consulting along with Carrie Bentley, and we're here today on behalf of the Western Power Trading Forum, or WPTF. WPTF is a member-based organization that has a wide range of members that advocates for competitive and transparent markets throughout the West. So it's not just a single voice here. We represent a wide range of different entities and market participants. So we go ahead, let's advance to slide 4. These are just introduction slides. Perfect. Okay. So first of all, I really want to thank the CAISO for giving us this opportunity to continue discussions around the scarcity pricing mechanism, especially an element that would allow for prices to gradually increase as the supply begins to tighten and before shortages or scarcity actually start to exist and occur. Personally, I think it's this element of an overall scarcity pricing design that provides the largest reliability benefit and market efficiencies to the market. So I was really excited to see the CAISO re-engage in these conversations and willing to explore this path a little bit more as part of the immediate effort. So really what I'm hoping to do today is further expand on an option, and it's one that we've actually been advocating for kind of throughout this entire effort. So for the past, 2 to 3 years, and that is I'm going to call it an ORDC-like construct. But it's based on a calculated supply margin. I think some people refer to it as latent supply or an energy margin. But I really want to emphasize this option doesn't involve a new product. It does not involve ancillary services, and it does not involve FRP. So this is really an option that we can employ and consider today, and it addresses all of those concerns that we've actually already kind of been hearing through the stakeholder comments so far. So really appreciate the CAISO giving some airtime on this. Full disclosure, this is still in the framework phase. So obviously there are some policy questions that we're going to need to address. But in my mind, none of these are insurmountable. They're just really design options that we'll need to think through as a stakeholder group. And so then kind of towards the end, I'll take some time to kind of compare this design with some of the other options that have been raised. So we can really kind of see the pros and cons of each of the options that have been put on the table so far and see how they differ. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to spend much time here just for the sake of time, but I really want to emphasize, just based on the conversations that have already taken place, the point that we're not talking about scarcity pricing just for high prices. It really is a narrative around making sure that those prices reflect real-time system conditions, and that it does provide that reliability benefit to the market when you have a scarcity pricing design that allows prices to start to increase before shortages exist, right? It's that signal being sent out ahead of scarcity or load shed events that allows for additional supply to be made available to the market. Any non-RA supply, maybe extra load participation can start to be enacted as well. So we really have to start sending that signal out prior to any of those conditions materializing. And, it might help prevent load shed events. It might help just prevent the magnitude and duration. But if we don't have that price signal being sent out ahead of time, we're just basically sending a signal out kind of a little too late to help us get out of, to help us prevent or avoid reliability events. So next slide, please. All right, so WPTF does believe that there is a workable solution that can be implemented, quote unquote, today, that achieves all the objectives of this policy effort. In fact, we think it's actually really similar to something the CAISO has in its straw proposal already for pricing armed load. It's just maybe slightly expanding the formula to capture conditions prior to when we're actually arming load. So I just want to throw out there, CAISO had a formula in its straw proposal that is really similar to this idea. It's just applying it to different conditions earlier on prior to actually arming load. And again, this is creating an ORDC-like mechanism, but it's based on a calculated supply margin. The idea being is that as that supply margin decreases, which is basically, the amount of supply made available to the market above what the market actually needs to meet its requirements, as that supply margin decreases, it's going to hit this demand curve or this ORDC that's going to create a price that becomes an adder to the energy prices. And with that adder, it then allows the energy prices being sent out by the market to be above the marginal cost and start reflecting that risk of shortage conditions actually occurring. At the most basic level, the supply margin is the demand or the market requirements, however we want to define those, minus the available supply to meet those requirements. So obviously this is one of those policy questions that we would have to think through is what do we include in the supply and the demand and how? Again, I don't think this is a question that's a showstopper. I think it's just a policy decision. Obviously, it's been noted that CAISO is the only BA that procures ancillary services, but we have to remember that the non-CAISO BAs, they have those requirements as well, and they just tell the CAISO, this is my ancillary service requirement. These are my resources that are meeting that requirement. So the information is there to make this be able to apply equitably across all BAs. And we can figure out as a stakeholder group how to reflect those differences in what we defined as demand and supply. Go ahead, next slide, please. So this is just a visualization of the concept. Please don't read into any numbers or prices I put on this chart. I literally just made them up for this slide. But really, there's a couple ways to illustrate the concept. One would be to have the demand bar increasing. The other would be to have the supply bar decreasing. I simply chose the latter. Again, don't read anything into it. But here what it's showing is if our supply margin in this example is 200 megawatts, because your demand is at 1,000, your supply is at 1,200. What this is saying is that if we have a supply margin above 200, we're not going to be hitting this demand curve. So it's pointing down to that downward sloping demand curve all the way in the bottom far right. So the price adder is 0. But if that supply stack begins to shrink, or maybe the demand side increases, and now we're in a situation where our margin is, let's say, somewhere between 150 and 200 megawatt hours, it would hit a $50 price adder. Between 150 and 75 megawatt margin, maybe it's $100 megawatt adder. I think you guys kind of get that concept here, but this is just a visualization of the idea. Again, ancillary, like using the AS reserve demand, the scarcity pricing mechanism that's already in place today is not included in here. FRP is not included in here. There's no new product being created. This is strictly looking at how much additional supply we have on the market to meet the requirements at that time. But here also kind of raises another question that we're going to need to think through is, how do we set those price points? What is the appropriate price adder? What is the appropriate megawatt points here? Obviously, I would look to the CAISO to probably do some analysis to help inform those points, especially maybe the megawatt component. But again, not a showstopper, but I think we could kind of think through what is an appropriate demand curve to would look like. I think though, if we take a step back, what we would ideally want to see if we look at the scarcity pricing design in its entirety, right? So we're talking this mechanism and also the other changes the CAISO has in its proposal, because I think it's really important to make sure when we're in scarcity conditions, we're still seeing those signals being sent out that the prices make sense, right? I don't think it would make sense for prices to be higher when we still have a little bit of a margin and then drop once we're actually into emergency conditions. I think we need to make sure that, you know, all those prices align and gradually increase as the supply margin decreases and we hit, you know, scarcity conditions, and then obviously prices begin to drop back down as the conditions get better. Next slide, please. So in previous stakeholder meetings, when we have raised this idea before, there have been some really valid questions that stakeholders have asked. And so I just wanted to take some time here to respond to some of those. And again, if your question is not listed here, please don't take that as me intentionally ignoring the question. It probably was just me not recalling that question. But I remember hearing these questions kind of more frequently throughout the conversation. So just briefly going through these, kind of the one is, how will this work with RSC and the RA program? I think there's been a lot of discussion on that already. We see the RSC and RA programs as capacity constructs that actually just make sure that there's enough capacity being made available to the market to meet expected needs. But obviously we can't predict you can't predict everything. The CPUC doesn't necessarily plan till 1 in 10 right now. It's a little bit lower. So we don't see there any conflict between having RSC and RA and having this type of pricing construct in the market, because this pricing construct is really about those real-time conditions, what's actually happening in the market at that time. Whereas the RSC and RA construct is more as, let's just make sure we have enough bids being made and resources being made available to the market. Oh, Danny, I'm sorry. I see your hand. Do you want me to finish the slide? Or do you want to go ahead?
Sure. No, I had one kind of follow-up question, but we should run through these first.
Do you want me to finish all the slides, or do you want me to pause after this one?
I think after this slide would be appropriate.
Okay, cool. Okay, so then the next one is, will this create false scarcity conditions? So there's been some concerns or talk about false scarcity and if this design would create that. Again, I don't see that as happening. This design would only trigger elevated prices once all the available supply made to the market begins to decrease at those predefined margins. And that's really when we want to start sending those signals out. So it really is based on the supply the market has access to at that moment to meet the needs at that moment. In other words, if it's triggering, it's because the market doesn't have enough, or it's getting really close to not having enough supply to meet all the needs of the market. So it's not a false scarcity signal. It really is, we are super close to running out of energy, and we need everything possible to be made available to the market. There's also been some concerns about exerting market power. You know, this kind of goes around the narrative of, well, scarcity pricing just means you want higher prices. Again, that's not the way we think of scarcity pricing. It really is, again, making sure that those prices accurately reflect the real-time system conditions. And furthermore, I don't think this is necessarily feasible for entities to exert market power because scarcity pricing exists for a couple of reasons. First, CAISO has a market power mitigation measure in place today, automatically checks for the ability of entities to exert market power, and they mitigate, if that's the case, from economic withholding. There's obviously physical withholding. I think the CAISO tariff explicitly prohibits that type of behavior. So the mere existence of a scarcity pricing mechanism does not provide any ability or incentive for entities to physically withhold to exert market power. There's also been some questions about how to apply this to all BAAs, knowing that, you know, the CAISO only procures AS for its BAA. I think I already kind of addressed this earlier on. I really think it just comes down to how we calculate the supply and demand for each BAA. CAISO has enough information and data to make sure the AS requirements and supply is made or is reflected equally in all the BAs, or maybe we choose another methodology. But again, it's not a showstopper. I think because this construct really just looks at the energy supply margin, it's not using the CAISO's existing ancillary service demand curve functionality to price it. It's not an issue with this option. Okay, I will take Danny's question and move on to the next slide.
Thanks, Kelly. It's maybe an additional question that I was wondering if you've given any thought to, and it's if we would need deliverability on any type of latent capacity price adder. I mean, on one hand, I think we definitely want to keep this as simple as possible. On the other hand, I'm kind of reliving the challenges that we've had with FRP when we initially didn't have nodal deliverability, and then thinking through imbalance reserve where we kind of tried to strike a middle ground about nodal deliverability, but different parameters which kind of maybe make it not quite a one-for-one nodal deliverability. Have you given any thought on how we might want to think about deliverability in relation to a latent capacity adder, price adder?
Honestly, I have not. My instinct is I don't think it needs to necessarily be part of the design. That's just my initial reaction because it really is about, does the overall market have enough supply available to meet its demand? Because the market would then be able to re-optimize what it's procuring from which resources based on that. Again, just my initial reaction. I don't think it's a necessary item. But obviously a policy question that, if we need to have conversations around, that's, always open to having this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so kind of throughout this whole working group, there have been different approaches mentioned that could be considered for designing this type of mechanism that allows prices to gradually increase as the supply tightens. So I just wanted to take a moment and very briefly compare this supply margin construct to some of the other options that have already been mentioned and highlight some of the differences because again, it does not use ancillary services, it does not use FRP, it does not require a new product. So it's, in our minds, it's something that we think could be implemented today and does not have to wait for future enhancements or for AS to be procured from all BAAs. So kind of on the far left, I have this desired feature, different desired features. I'm sure there's a lot of other different desired features, but these were the ones I wanted to highlight because I think they are the main distinctions between the different approaches. And so we have, a supply margin, which is what I just walked through. Enhanced AS, and I know that's pretty broad, but there's been a lot of different changes that have been thrown out there to how we can use ancillary services to have this type of scarcity pricing, enhanced FRP, and then a new reserve product. So I'm not going to go through all of these, every single box here. I think everyone here can kind of walk through the differences, but I did want to highlight kind of one thing to think through in terms of a new reserve product is, again, I think this kind of came up in conversations already, is we really don't think it makes sense to create a new reserve product just for the purposes of strengthening price signals. So that's just something to keep in mind when we think through all the different options. And for enhanced AS and enhanced FRP, I think even if we were to make all the changes we could possibly want to those products, one, we're talking years down the road. This type of scarcity pricing design actually was brought up back in 2020 after the August events and was made a high priority back there. So I don't think we necessarily want to wait until AS and FRP are completely redesigned another, 5 to 10 years down the road. But even at that situation, they are still going to have some flaws in their design that doesn't get at what is a true robust scarcity pricing design. So even if we waited, I still don't think we would get to that robust design that achieves all the objectives that a true scarcity pricing mechanism would achieve. So again, not planning on going through all those, but there for your consumption. Happy to ask questions if you guys have some thoughts on those later. Next slide, please.
Hey, Kelly, there was a question. I want to make sure Todd.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm horrible at monitoring the chats.
No problem.
Or the hands.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead, Todd. Let us know what slide also.
I think it would be most useful to go back to that bar chart, the stacked bar chart, if possible. Great. Hey, Callie, thanks for walking us through this. I did miss this, so I appreciate you walking me through it. I assume when you say that there's no ancillary services, that the demand side would not account for ancillary service requirements or the imbalance reserve requirements. This is pure real-time electric demand.
So I think that is one of the policy questions. What I meant by it does not require ancillary services is that it does not use the ancillary service shortage calculation or scarcity pricing mechanism today to get at the price signals. I think if we wanted to look at the amount of reserves we have, it really is what is that requirement and how much supply do we have to meet that requirement. And even though we don't procure it for the other BAAs, and maybe someone from the CAISO can correct me if I'm wrong here, I thought the non-CAISO BAAs tells the CAISO, this is how much AS requirement we have, and here are our resources that we're using to meet that. So that information's out there, the numbers are out there. So I really think it's just making sure that however we calculate demand and supply, it's done equitably for all the BAAs. So either include AS for all of them or don't. But again, that's one of those open policy questions that I kind of highlighted.
I appreciate that. And I would think that we'd want to think through how our reserve demand curve might interact with this pricing differently than those that don't have a reserve demand pricing curve. Additionally, I would want to think through how low priority exports are counted in this process, making sure that they're not.
Completely agree.
My biased opinion would be that the low priority exports would not count towards someone's supply from their import direction.
Yeah, no, completely agree with all that. And I think that's why on the previous slide, I had kind of said, the demand may include and kind of listed out some stuff and supply may include, because I think you're right. We can talk through all of that. But again, I don't think it's a design showstopper. I think it's just making sure that we think it whatever we come up with demand and supply reasonably reflects what we're wanting to measure and that it's equitably done for all the BAAs.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yep, of course. And Brenda, I had one more slide. Do you mind if I just wrap that up and then we can take any other questions? I can't tell on my end if there's raised hands or not.
Oh yeah, go for it. No more hands at this time.
Okay, cool. So if you want to go to the final thoughts. Okay, perfect. So just to wrap up here, obviously the August 2020 blackout events highlighted that there was a significant flaw in the way prices are formulated in the CAISO market during scarcity conditions. And at that time, the CAISO and the stakeholders, all committed to addressing this issue as a high priority item. And that's, a mechanism that really allows prices to increase as near scarcity conditions begin to materialize. And I really do think this is a fundamental element of a scarcity pricing design. So I was really excited to hear that the CAISO seems to want to continue exploring whether or not there is a potential way to develop that type of mechanism in the near term and address the existing flaw that we've known about for years. So again, I just want to highlight or emphasize the timing here. It's been 5 years since we've known about this flaw, and in our minds, we honestly probably should have addressed this years ago. So now is the time, and I really do think that any further delay is really unwarranted and actually puts us at a higher reliability risk, because we are facing an environment here shortly where there's going to be multiple markets operating out in the West. And if we don't have the accurate price formation and we're starting to enter those high stress days or wildfires or what have you, and we don't have those prices sending the signal to the broader market that we need as much available supply as possible that's out there, it actually increases our reliability risk. So again, scarcity pricing isn't just wanting, it's not about wanting high prices. It's wanting to ensure that the market is sending those appropriate and accurate price signals when it needs to be. And so, there's been a lot of different approaches that's been discussed, but we really do feel like exploring this energy margin construct provides the most viable option. The other approaches all have some flaws in them in terms of not being able to fully achieve all the goals and objectives that we see a robust scarcity pricing design needs to have. And we're not saying that we have all the answers and formulations for the energy supply margin, although maybe looking at the CAISO's formula that they have in the straw proposal right now for pricing when we arm load might not be a bad starting point. But there are some outstanding policy questions that we need to be answered, but I don't think any of them are showstoppers. I really do think it's, more design options that we need to think through and decide together as a stakeholder community which direction we want to go in terms of those policy questions. So that is all I have. Appreciate you guys giving me time here. And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
We do have Todd. Hand is raised again. Let's go ahead.
Hey, Callie, another quick question for you. Has this been done anywhere else, or is this a novel design?
No, I think another ISO has it, and I apologize. I meant to look that up. I think maybe one or two have something very similar.
Great, interesting. Thanks.
Yep. I'd love to take credit for it, but it's not my idea.
And next we do have John S. Harvey. Let's go ahead. Go ahead and unmute John. He's still muted. John, keep your hand raised. Yeah, thank you.
This is John Harvey with the Utah Public Service Commission. I'm trying to wrap my head around how this approach would work once EDAM is actually implemented. It seems that if you had a functional EDAM and then a functional real-time energy imbalance market, that the market should do this pricing automatically. What on a going forward basis, I can see in the past it might have been useful, but on a going forward basis, I just have a hard time seeing the need for it. So if you could kind of explain what it does that those markets wouldn't do.
Yeah, so under EDAM and EIM, what the market lacks today is allowing the prices to rise above marginal cost to signal the risk that we're nearing scarcity conditions and we're about to start shedding load, or not having enough reserves to meet our requirements. So there's nothing in the market today, nothing in the EDAM market design or in the EIM market design that would allow that to happen. Across all products, right? So there is the CAISO has their ancillary service scarcity pricing design, but there's some flaws with that. The biggest one being it's AS isn't procured in all the BAAs, so it only exists the CAISO. But it's not fully re-optimized. It's not included in the 5-minute market, and that actually only triggers once we've reached scarcity conditions. So I'm not sure if that helped or not, or if you have follow-up questions.
Well, a quick follow-up. I mean, if the day-ahead market is doing a full region optimization for at least the ones that would be participating, any shortfalls would drive up prices that day ahead. I mean, you can't make supply, instantaneously appear. I mean, it either has been built or it hasn't. So I'm really struggling to. I mean, I can see that on the demand side, you can possibly incent people to cut demand, but I just don't see what this does that a market optimization can't do.
Yeah, so it really is about making sure those prices are above the marginal cost and reflect that risk of shedding load. And I think in that you bring raise a good point, and I didn't touch on this specifically. I think maybe James might be raising this in his presentation, so I don't want to steal that discussion. Is should it be applied in the day ahead and the real time, or just the real time? I think theoretically and ideally it's applied in both, because if you have this in the day ahead market and you get those elevated prices, what it can do is actually can end up committing more resources and making sure that it's posturing the day ahead market better than it otherwise would. And it also can get that participating load to maybe you don't clear as much load in the day ahead, and maybe the LSCs look at that and or maybe they try and clear more in the day ahead if they know that there's a potential high stress day in real time. But I think generally speaking, this pricing mechanism should be applied in both the day ahead and the real time, and it really is about sending that signal out there to make sure that that market participants know that we are in this tight stress system days. It provides extra incentive to make sure resources are performing. So there's a whole host of benefits that this provides the market.
Next, we have Dan Williams.
Hey, Callie, it's Dan from the Energy Authority. That last answer kind of headed in the direction that I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit more on, or just share your thoughts. Great presentation, of course. But I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit on the role that having more dynamic and variable and potentially high and potentially low prices in real-time disciplines market behavior when it comes to, say, bidding in demand in the day-ahead market, or participating in as a virtual supplier, virtual demand in the day-ahead market, and even just in how responsive the demand curves for imbalance reserves, or how we look at reliability capacity, just sort of how all those things are influenced to an extent by the potential threat for higher prices in the real-time market, and just from a economic theory perspective, how those things interact with each other in your mind.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That could probably take a very long time to answer everything. So I would say the biggest thing is the better we can set up the day ahead market and get the resources that we need to be committed, get the demand participating in the day ahead. Then when you get into real time, you're better set up there, and you're not then having to rely on operators doing all kinds of emergency actions and potentially crashing prices when we really need them to be high. I think the incentive for resource performance is a big thing. I think if there is a real risk of seeing scarcity pricing materialize in the real-time market, resources that clear the day ahead are going to be incentive to make sure that they remain available and they perform as expected in the real-time market. I think similarly for load as well there too. So I know you had a lot of other questions in there as well, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's the rest. Yeah, it was definitely leading the witness there a little bit, but the a couple other things in there I think are just that it incentivizes resources to be built to be more flexible. It incentivizes the markets to be more flexible, because it just says that if there's a greater stick or a greater carrot, that you're willing to move quicker to make sure that you're able to respond to that. And to me, that just becomes a very important thing when we have very fast responding resources available in the market, when we have dynamics going on at interties as well, and being able to get the right resources set up also from a congestion perspective day ahead. I just think all of those things are such important aspects of the market that are influenced by getting the right price in real time, that if we take all of that into account and see how those things interact with each other, it's a lot harder to characterize scarcity pricing as just an attempt to raise prices, because our energy markets are such dynamic systems that if you raise a price in one place, it has an impact in another place. And what we're really looking for is the most efficient net overall outcome, that at times a high real-time price may drive a lower overall cost of service. And so I led you a little bit in that, but that's kind of where I was thinking in the comment.
Yeah, and actually just to add on, I think it would also help incent more forward contracting, which ultimately leads to kind of more efficient overall markets as well, if we have that scarcity pricing in place.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep. James, I thought I saw your hand raised and then it went down.
Yeah, I decided I wanted to add some context. I was going to maybe defer to my slides, but maybe I'll just accept the invitation now. So back in the early 2010s, when scarcity pricing was first being considered by FERC and considered in the academic community, and this is in response to John Harvey's question, a lot of the motivation was actually about getting demand to participate flexibly in the market. And essentially what scarcity pricing is doing is it's rationing in a way. When you have, when the supply overall is insufficient to meet the sum of the demand of different products the market's buying, you have to the market has to have some way of identifying, who you're going to serve, who and what schedules you're going to serve first. And part of the motivation was FERC was hoping, that scarcity pricing was going to send the quote unquote right price to load or consumers, demand, whatever term broadly you want to use, to know when it should voluntarily curtail instead of, hanging on to, a price that's too low and continuing to consume and ultimately leading to a system shortage. So I hope that context is helpful, that back in the early, if you're interested, reach out to me. I can send you some of those early FERC NOPRs on scarcity pricing, and you'll see a lot of dialogue about pricing specifically for the demand side of the market. Thanks, Callie, for letting me add that in.
No, of course, no, I appreciate that context. Brenda, do we have anyone else?
I do see John Harvey. Let's make sure he has a question.
Yes, and I appreciate that last comment. Just for some background, I am a PhD economist whose PhD is in public economics and regulation, and I have read those NOPRs, and so I'm not shooting blind here, but it just honestly sounds to me like what you're saying is we're going to set up markets, but we don't believe they'll work, so we're going to set up an adder that uses some type of an ad hoc rule on top of those markets. And it just seems like if you design the market correctly, you shouldn't need this.
Yeah, I would say that this is a fundamental element of any market, any wholesale energy market. All the other ISOs have a scarcity pricing design mechanism in place that gets these prices to start to gradually increase before scarcity conditions occur. The CAISO just doesn't have that in its market yet, and I think that was really highlighted, the impact of that back in 2020 following the August events, and so that was kind of a one of the first times that known flaw was really highlighted, that we don't have that mechanism in our market. And I wouldn't say it's a band-aid on top of an issue. It's a fundamental element of creating an appropriate market.
I think we'll just move on and I'll agree to not be convinced.
Okay, fair.
I did see James raise his hand, but I think he lowered it on making sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna get into this a little bit. The one, if I may add one piece of clarification, in Callie's right, what scarcity pricing is striving for is gradual price increase as the risk of shortage grows. But I just want to point out that, like, in general, electricity markets do gradually increase in price as we get more scarce, because you're using more expensive supply as you move up the stack. So we don't want to confuse you to say that that's not happening, because of course, that the market is going to rely eventually on the most expensive units at the end of the stack when we're getting close to the edge. But where scarcity pricing is different is that those prices are all based on production costs, fuel, other things for the generators to be operating. And what scarcity pricing is saying is that, well, that's appropriate until you get to the point where the sum of the commodities you're trying to buy in the market there's not sufficient supply to meet all of these, to meet all of the demand. And so it essentially is a way of sort of integrating, absent like real flexible load bidding in the real-time market. How do we signal to the market where and when to start curtailing the use of certain supply and at what costs? And so my first two slides in my presentation will sort of get into this. Might be a good opportunity to revisit to see if this is clicking or not. Thanks again, Callie, for letting me jump in there.
No, of course. I'm done with my presentation. I don't know if there's anyone else with a question or comment.
We do have a raised hand from Seth Cochran.
Yeah, hey, I won't belabor the point. It was along the lines of James that in response to John Harvey, the issue is there's an absence of demand bidding So scarcity pricing allows you to reflect the willingness of people to potentially consume at certain prices and reflect the willingness that they would have at certain pricing points to curtail, forego consumption, or continue to curtail or continue to consume. Thank you.
If I could add on, Seth, you just reminded me that the Market Surveillance Committee, I think this was an opinion they wrote in the early 2010s, had a note in there that if you had, perfectly flexible real-time demand bidding, you would obviate the need for scarcity pricing, because loads that don't want to consume at certain prices would just voluntarily curtail. And so in a sense, you're right that scarcity pricing is sort of a proxy, if you will, for the rationing or voluntary curtailment of certain schedules as the prices get more expensive. And the methods, some of which Callie described, are the mechanism that markets use to represent the demand, the absence of flexible demand to know when and at what price to start curtailing schedules.
There are currently no more questions or raised hands.
Okay, great. I will hand it back to you, James. Thanks.
Okay, well, first of all, a big thank you to Steve and his co-contributors and Callie for answering our call to have stakeholders present at these working group meetings. It fostered some great dialogue, and we love to see that. I think it deepens the discussion, and so again, we really appreciate that. And for future notice, in these working group meetings, we solicit stakeholder presentations. You're welcome to volunteer at any time if you would like to prepare some remarks. You don't have to provide slides. If you would just like to have some prepared remarks, and we will leave space for you to present. And so hopefully you find that valuable. And again, thanks for our panel for stepping up to that. Brenda, can we move to my set of slides? Okay, so we have about an hour left in this discussion, and I'm not sure we're going to get all the way through, but we'll do our best. This presentation is essentially trying to ground us into the question of trying to identify the most fundamental questions that we need to start answering as it relates more specifically to what's a feasible design for a comprehensive scarcity pricing approach. We agree that the comprehensive scarcity design approach needs to be symmetrically applied or consistently applied to the entire market footprint. That is a core principle that came out of the working group process, and it is not our intention to violate that in this presentation. We have what our intention is to do is to get us thinking about beyond sort of the why type questions and more towards the what and how type questions, and recognizing that this can get very complicated. And so what we try to do is present it in a way that brings it brings out the most high level questions, see what the feedback is like, and rally this group around some ideas that are sort of conceptually appealing. And as we move along in the process, we keep adding more and more detail there. So kind of like Callie's disclaimer, the slides that you're going to see here are in some ways purposefully simplified and will leave some context missing intentionally, because we're trying to keep the questions, the concepts at a higher level, and as we move along in this process, get deeper. So the first two slides that I have for you are sort of sort of a logical chain of scarcity pricing theory. Scarcity pricing, again, was sort of, I think of the foundation of scarcity pricing theory to date back to Bill Hogan in the early 2010s. And if you want to read that paper, there's a link to it in the straw proposal in one of the footnotes. And FERC became interested in scarcity pricing, as far as I can tell, around this time as well. Other markets have implemented scarcity pricing with different techniques and at different intensities. So it is a feature that FERC endorses and is part of other FERC jurisdictional markets. And, CAISO and the Western EIM are unique among these markets in that we're a multi-BA market. And so we have some unique challenges in terms of design of a comprehensive scarcity pricing mechanism, but, no reason not to try. And so, the basic of power system, or of the theory goes that because power systems, need to continuously balance supply and demand, grid operators must hold reserves and a portfolio of reserves to keep the system stable. So portfolio of reserves refers to the fact that depending on different system conditions, you need reserves to respond at different frequencies. And so you have things like frequency response and regulation response and contingency reserves and flexible ramping product and all of these different types of reserve products that are procured on different timescales to meet different, different needs. And so all else equal, when reserves are abundant, there's plenty of this supply to go around. It means the grid is more stable. Because if anything funny were to happen, generators trip online, key transmission path goes out, a big solar, big plot of clouds reducing your solar output, the market has reserves available to address any type of operational uncertainty that it needs, and means it can ride through these types of events. But when reserves become more scarce, the reliability risk grows because the ability for the system to ride out these events becomes more limited, and you have more limited options and resources available to do that. That's the basic trade-off. So physical scarcity, before we even get into the term scarcity pricing, is occurring when available resources begin to fall short of the system needs. And so that physical scarcity is sort of the grounding of scarcity pricing. Next slide, please. So when you're running low on reserves, each additional megawatt of capacity that comes into the market carries a high opportunity cost because the market, again, values reserves in order to make the system more reliable, but also has current needs. It needs to use energy or capacity as energy to serve demand, et cetera, et cetera. And so each additional megawatt begins to have higher and higher opportunity costs to the market because it can be met it can meet either the current energy demand or be held for reserves at any given time. And in theory, the value of lost load, or VOLL, is sort of the theoretical anchor to represent the cost to consumers of involuntary load shedding. And so it represents at the highest level, if the market, all else equal, had a decision between shedding load on one side or getting one additional megawatt, paying for one additional megawatt in order to avoid shedding load, it would do so at this theoretical value of lost load. And then operationally, a demand curve is put in the market that's anchored by this value of lost load number that translates this value into market prices that rise as the growing value of reserves and the increasing risk of load shedding. And so those that have been following this initiative long enough have probably seen the downward sloping demand curve type picture in your mind and can picture that. And the theory is that, prices should be reflecting not just the production cost or the fuel cost of the units that are providing the incremental megawatt, but also the incremental risk reduction of any given additional megawatt on the system towards shedding load, which has a value. And so in scarcity pricing, the system marginal cost is not just the cost of the previous unit, but also the cost or the avoided cost or avoided risk of an additional unit of capacity towards reliability. Scarcity pricing is essentially the mechanism that encodes this in the market prices. And scarcity pricing, generally incentivizes and mobilizes all resources that it can on both sides of the market equation, as much supply as possible, as much demand curtailing voluntarily as possible in order to maintain system balance in advance of scarcity conditions without having to shed load. And so this is the basic concept of scarcity pricing. And we'll go to the next slide. So before I pause for questions, I want to condense that information into what I think are the 4 foundational elements of scarcity pricing design. And we're going to have to work through the details of each of these. First, scarcity pricing must include some sort of metric or trigger that measures when available resources no longer meet system needs. So in Callie's presentation, broadly speaking, it was represented by some calculation of a margin between what supply is available and how much supply is demanded. And there are, an infinite number of ways to do that calculation, as she acknowledges, but the market would need a metric of some sort to determine, how do you measure scarcity? Number 2, a scarcity pricing design needs a reliability value or some sort of metric that quantifies the cost of involuntary load shedding. Okay, and so theoretically, the value of lost load is that anchor number. In practice, different ISOs have taken different measures to, scale their scarcity pricing based on in different ways. And so, all of that would have to be discussed. Number 3 is we would need a price formation mechanism, something that converts the reserve scarcity levels into prices that reflect the reliability risk. Most commonly, this is done in markets using reserve demand curves. As Callie points out, doesn't necessarily have to be reserves with which you're measuring, and I'll talk a little bit about that in these slides, but you need some way for basically in the market optimization to translate the scarcity and the price of that scarcity risk into the market price. And finally, you need all of those things to be done such that the price signals provide you adequate forward-looking signals so that you leave market participants sufficient time to respond to impending scarcity and adjust their behavior in ways that resolve or reduce the risk of impending shortages. Okay, and so the whole concept is that we don't wait until shortages actually happen for scarcity pricing to kick in. Although you need prices when you're short of products, you want, ideally you want prices to signal responses in ways that avoid shortages from happening in the first place. And so keep in mind that, yes, the scarcity pricing might result in gradually higher price signals, all else equal, as you're advancing into the scarcity event. But the cost of the scarcity events are also very, very, very costly. And by having, and even some emergency actions or relying on the most expensive units at the wrong times because you don't have enough look ahead in measurement of risk in the market to know how scarce you're going to be, could mean that all else equal, you're relying on more costly actions to maintain system balance than you would have access to if these price signals were introduced into the market earlier and more gradually to get people to change their offers and behavior. Just a quick pause to see if there's any questions or feedback on those 3 slides. Okay.
James, I don't see any questions. Oh, wait, just one question just came up. Catherine Stockton, please be sure to introduce yourself.
See, and I just, the theory sounds nice. So scarcity pricing should motivate resources to respond by increasing supply or reducing demand. But like in practice, there's no, I don't know of any signal that we've developed outside of a demand response program to reduce demand based on a price signal. Like the market is just not set up automatically to encourage consumers to consume less demand. So I just become and then I'm also very concerned. You talk about how we have reserves, and yeah, we do have reserves that all California taxpayers pay for. And so it's, I just want to know why those reserves aren't enough.
Yeah, so you're referring to the set of strategic reserves, and I was using reserves a little more broadly. And from a policy perspective, of course, we would have to figure out for the California balancing areas that have access to these types of reserves, whether and how these would count towards their margin at any given time. And yeah, you're right there. The system is set up and resources have responded in ways that have responded to this certain way of pricing. And that's why I kind of was going back to John's question earlier about, FERC in the early 2010s was really focused on demand participation when it was thinking about scarcity pricing, because insofar that the demand side resources that we have are insufficient to respond to scarcity pricing could be because there is no scarcity pricing for them to respond to. And so there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem in my mind where, it may be that we don't have sufficient ability to do this because there aren't the incentives and the price signals that are out there to justify, more participation of various curtailable loads into the existing, participation models that CAISO has to participate in that way. Recognizing there are some limitations there that are being addressed, but thanks for the question.
Hey, James, was Catherine from CPUC? Oh, thank you. Yeah, she is from Energy Division. Thank you, Catherine. No more questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Catherine. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we need those 4 things. Now, the basic problem statement that many have mentioned here is that the market, the ISO market's portfolio of reserves cannot fully support comprehensive scarcity pricing across the footprint. And that's a problem statement we've been tackling in the working group for a long time. And here are the basic reasons here, some of which have already been said. The real-time market essentially has 4 reserve products. 3 of them, regulation and spin, non-spin, are only procured within the CAISO balancing area. And we agree that because these products being only procured in the CAISO balancing area are not appropriate for comprehensive scarcity pricing for the entire market footprint. They're also only incrementally procured, meaning they're only the incremental quantity that's needed in real time is procured by the real-time market, and it's also not procured in the RTD, the 5-minute market. And so because of those things, we think even if you were to enable the entire Western market with AS procurement, you would still need to upgrade or update the real-time market's ability to procure AS across all markets and co-optimized fully with energy and flexible ramping in order to have it be sufficiently designed. But then finally, we mentioned this in the straw proposal that the WEC, unlike some of the Eastern markets that are more interconnected in nature, the WEC requires all of its balancing areas to maintain minimum reserves, minimum contingency reserve requirements. And for this purpose, the CAISO's existing scarcity reserve demand curve is only intended to be violated when the system is actually short of the AS. And so even if you were to accomplish, item number 1 and item number 2, the scarcity reserve demand curve is only set up as it exists today to set prices when the system's actually short and not as the system is as impending shortages are happening. And so you would also probably need to have some sort of additional procurement of these types of products in order to get the price signals you're looking for. And then you have flexible ramping products. So flexible ramping product does have demand curves. Flexible ramping products procured across all market participants. Flexible ramping product is procured in the FMM and RTD. And is procured economically on a demand curve, unlike AS. And so in some sense, it does provide some amount of scarcity pricing, but as far as a comprehensive scarcity pricing design like we're talking about, flexible ramping product is designed to address scarcity between intervals and the scarcity of ramp specifically between intervals. And I think the working group agrees that that is not a sufficient amount of look ahead to be or capturing the movement of energy against uncertainty in a far enough time frame to get the sort of scarcity pricing that we're looking for. And so for those reasons, the existing FRP is not sufficient to get us all the way to where we are. And I want to do one more slide and then I'll pause for questions. So if we can move to the next slide. It essentially leaves us here in two places. If we want to have comprehensive scarcity pricing designed I'm not even going to use the word near term, in the medium term, because there's a lot of things to work out here. We basically see two different options. And this is our reflection. There may be more options. We're open to hearing if there are more. We basically see two different paths forward. And actually in design, they're remarkably similar, as we'll explain. But one is that we could implement a new reserve product attached to it, an ORDC style demand curve and co-optimize this product with energy. And so that is one path forward. A second path forward, as kind of laid out by Callie in her presentation, is that you could conceive of sort of this latent margin concept that's embedded directly in the market's objective function that is measuring not an actual reserve product, but is measuring sort of at any given time the amount of available capacity relative to the system demand and pricing that in the market's objective function with a very similar type demand risk curve, if you will. And we'll talk a lot more about those things in the future slides, but these are essentially the only options that we see. That being said, in a very long-term world where neither of those options were acceptable and we as a group cannot conceive of any other good alternatives, there of course is the opportunity in the longer run, if you have full real-time market AS co-optimization and procurement across the Western footprint, and you have AS procured beyond its minimum requirements, all of those big changes. Technically that would be something to feasibly implement more comprehensive scarcity pricing. But again, the dominoes that would need to fall in order for that to be the proposed approach would tack on a lot more time than the options A and B on the slide here. And of course, on a shorter term basis, we still have the policy forth in the straw proposal regarding pricing of supply during armed load conditions and pricing of supply during load shedding conditions as well as sort of more incremental steps. So let me pause to see if there's any questions or feedback here.
We do have Mike. Let's please be sure to introduce yourself.
Looking at A on this slide, we have the imbalance reserve product that's going to be introduced with DAME and EDAM. Why can't that provide this new reserve product that you're talking about in A?
So imbalance reserve can provide some limited form of scarcity pricing. And the reason why I say limited are essentially for two reasons. One is that it's procured in the day-ahead market only, and not sort of the same product itself is not re-procured in the real-time market. And so it doesn't really provide any real-time market price signal just because the product's not procured at that time. And we'll talk about in some of the future slides, scarcity pricing between the real-time market and the day-ahead market. I tend to think that there's some value to having consistent price formation between day-ahead and real-time, but ultimately, scarcity pricing is, in my mind, more of a real-time market phenomena that you want to have. You want to have the real-time market be able to position the immediate need. And so for those reasons, the imbalance reserve falls short for that. The second is that the imbalance reserve demand curve prices are, although set based on, a long stakeholder process and will be evaluated in the upcoming DAME implementation working groups, but the dollar values associated with the demand curve for the imbalance reserve product don't seem to us to be appropriate for the sort of answering the question about what does it cost, what is the cost of the risk we're avoiding for real time specifically. And so in the day ahead market, it was argued, well, because you have more opportunities in the day ahead market and in between now and the real time to sort of muster up the supply and the response that you need to evaluate or respond to shortages, that the price for the demand curve prices for the imbalance reserve were set a lot lower than they were for FRP, for example, because of that. But once you get closer to real time, you essentially are starting to run out of options. And so the prices might be higher to reflect that.
And Mike, can you repeat your affiliation? We didn't capture it in the beginning.
Yeah, Florio Consulting.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Dawn from CISA.
Hi, it's Don Feather from CISA. I just wanted to follow on to that conversation because I think it actually shows how scarcity pricing, having a true scarcity pricing design is actually needed and works in conjunction with imbalance reserves. And that's because we're only targeting the procurement of imbalance reserves to cover 95% uncertainty. Because if we in essence procured sufficient imbalance reserve to cover 100% of the uncertainty that could materialize, it would be very, 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 very costly. And then we also, procure imbalance reserves on a demand curve, really where it's where you ensure you can buy imbalance reserves only if the cost to the market is less than the value they provide in terms of addressing uncertainty when it materializes. But in both instances, you're not buying to 100%. You're implementing a demand curve, which so that you don't, in essence, over procure, means that there will be instances where that is insufficient. And there aren't enough offers into the CAISO market footprint, and that's EDAM footprint wide, that you need to now trigger the scarcity pricing mechanism to start communicating that, yes, we did all of this stuff day ahead, but we are now short and becoming more, or we're going to be short relative to the way we planned the day ahead market, and all supply that's available in the West, please should make yourself available to the CAISO. And if you have any sort of flexible demand, please reduce your consumption. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. Okay, looks like we can move forward. Slide 13. Okay. So we're going to, in this set of slides, talk about sort of 5 major design discussions, and we want to keep those 2 options, A and B, in mind when we're thinking about these things. For the most part, it is our conclusion that if either A and B can be designed in a way where they're basically the same thing, and it comes down to, there are some subtle nuances here and there where one approach might have some advantages over the other, but we didn't want to frame this discussion as A and B competing against each other, like should we do A, should we do B, although eventually we will need to decide, you know, more specifically how that goes down. But we think that these 5 questions are things that we need to think about even before deciding between those 2 methods. And so let's start with the first question. Go to the next slide. So the fundamental differences between these approaches, and this is going to be super basic, many assumptions left out, but this is the minimal amount of information that you need to understand what the basic of this idea is, and so you can compare them with one another. So we'll start with the reserve plus an ORDC approach. First, you need a reserve requirement. So you need to have a some sort of requirement in the market where the market needs to procure some amount of reserves, okay? Then you need a price with a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, so the market is going to procure and fulfill the requirement as long as the cost of doing so is less than the corresponding price on the demand curve. Okay, so if the market if the requirement is 1,000 megawatts and the market can buy 1,000 megawatts for $0, then the market will buy all 1,000 megawatts. If the market can buy 500 megawatts at $0, but 500 megawatts at $1,500, then it's going to forgo 500 megawatts of the requirement because the price of procuring it is too expensive. And all of that price quantity coupling is all decided down the road and what the demand curve shape in numbers should look like, but there's going to be some sort of demand curve that's downward sloping. Then you have the reserves marginal value from the demand curve enter the co-optimization. So the demand curves can set the price for the relevant reserve, and very importantly, because reserves and energy are co-optimized in the market, the opportunity cost of a resource providing energy or reserves flows through the math of the market such that the energy and the reserve reflect the scarcity value. That's really important. And so, one conclusion that we're making here is that it doesn't really matter whether the scarcity adder or scarcity function is attached to energy or reserve. If you design it exactly the same way, it's going to flow through the prices exactly the same way because the products are co-optimized, assuming that the energy and the reserves are one-to-one fungible at all times. And so because of that, the energy LMPs inherit the reserves opportunity cost. So the reserve prices themselves will be set based on the demand curve. And because of the co-optimization of energy and reserves, the energy LMPs inherit the opportunity cost of that scarce reserve. So compare that to slide 15. If we'll go to slide 15, which is the very basics of the latent margin approach. in which you don't need to define a new reserve product or a new reserve requirement. Basically, what you're doing is you're defining some sort of system margin, we'll call it M. Again, simplified down to the bone. I'm not prescribing how exactly we would measure system margin, of which many different options are available to us. But imagine roughly that you're measuring the available capacity available to the market relative to the amount of demand, and what's left over is the margin that you have. All else equal, more margin means more reliable, so lower price, lower risk. And you are adding some sort of risk cost to the objective function, directly to the objective function. The risk cost could be exactly the same as the ORDC risk cost. Could be the same prices and quantities, exactly the same. And the marginal value of avoiding that or reducing that margin incorporates its way into the prices of energy and for all commodities that change the margin. So it's going to flow through energy prices, and it's going to flow into reserve prices exactly the same way that a reserve demand curve would. So let's go to the next slide. And I'll pause after this slide to reflect, but in our opinion, these two methods can be made to be essentially mathematically equivalent. If you assume that all parameters to these methods were perfectly consistent, then both approaches would yield the exact same dispatch, the exact same LMPs, and the exact same reserve prices. Both methods are essentially deriving prices from some sort of risk function over a margin, whether the margin is available reserves or available supply for energy. It's some margin, and the risk function can be made exactly the same between the methods. And because the market's co-optimizing energy and reserves, the shadow value of the scarcity term propagates to energy, LMPs, and reserve prices in the exact same way, regardless of whether the scarcity term applies to energy or reserves. And the trick will be for the energy supply margin approach that it's not going to suffice, in our opinion, to simply count upward capacity from available bids. So what we don't think we want to do is to say, okay, well, at time T, the market demands 40,000 megawatts of supply, and the sum of all the supply bids that we have sum up to 50,000 megawatts, and therefore you have a 10,000 megawatt margin. We think that would be an inappropriate representation of the actual margin that's available to supply to the grid. And we think that there are two factors that need to be considered when making that assessment. One is that the assessment needs to be time bound. And so one obvious risk of the approach I just mentioned is that it's possible that not all of the 10,000 megawatts of that margin can be accessed within the time frame with which we're measuring the scarcity. Okay, so if you say we have 10,000 megawatts of extra bids and we're capturing, we need to know, for example, how much supply can we access, the maximum amount of supply we can access in 30 minutes, maybe, for example. That might be 5,000 megawatts, not 10,000. Or maybe you say, what's the maximum amount of supply I can access within an hour or 2 hours or whatever time domain you want. And so we think that the margin needs to be time bound in that way to some time number. And we'll talk in the slides too, but potentially the margin should also be deliverable to load, insofar as that you're counting capacity based on bids and the ability to ramp up and down. Insofar as that capacity is not available to actually serve load, then it's not really functionally useful. It has no reliability value if it's stuck behind constraints. And so we can talk about what level of deliverability or if deliverability is required to make something like this work, but it's definitely something that should be considered. Okay, pause for any questions or feedback.
We do have Callie. Let's go ahead.
Hey, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Just real quick. So wouldn't you have something similar? I feel like maybe there's a bullet on the slide that's missing because I think another fundamental difference is the approach requires us defining a new product. So obviously you have all the questions that come along with what do we define? And I think there's also this time component of that as well. So I don't think it's defining these elements are just on the energy supply margin approach. I think you would have to also think about that on the reserve on creating a new product.
Yeah, that's 100% true. So I didn't mean to put this bullet on there as a way of sliding the reserve or the supply margin approach, but I only wanted to make the point that in the reserve, when you define a reserve product, you have to answer questions like these about, what's the amount of what's the amount of capacity that you can hold on a unit to meet the reserve requirement. Is it a 15, 30, 60, 120 minute product? And so in going through that process, you're defining these things that we would similarly, in our opinion, need to define for the energy supply margin. And questions about, deliverability of the reserves, those are questions you would have to ask yourself in the reserve margin approach. And we think probably similarly needs to be asked in the energy margin approach as well. So didn't mean it as a slight, but just that, through the process. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't take it as that. I just meant I think there's like another bullet because this is about the differences. And I think with the reserve, you'd have to ask questions as well. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there. So just something to think about, and I think we've kind of mentioned this throughout this whole process in our stakeholder comments, is the idea of defining a new reserve product or a new product that doesn't actually have an operational need. It seems somewhat not the best approach in our minds because, a product should be serving a need from an operational and grid perspective, not just creating a product to create stronger price signals. So just something to keep in mind as we continue thinking about these two approaches. But I appreciate you kind of laying out, both options here and providing this conversation.
Yeah. Just depending on, there are some who have the opinion in the working group that a new reserve, the longer horizon reserve product, for example, could provide some operational benefit in, the Department of Market Monitoring comes to mind. And so, but yeah, the design, the design of any sort of, reserve product would need to be undertaken in a way where you're wanting to procure something useful, I think is your main point.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Callie.
We have one hand raised from Doug. Please state where you're from.
Bochignone for the Bay Area Municipal Transmission Group. Just thinking about some of the things you just laid out here, James, if it seems like if you're gonna be, you're trying to address the fact that there isn't the right price signal out there to load to incentivize the load participation. It seems a little bit circular because like if that signal's not getting out there with the current market, I think part of the reason it's not out there is load isn't able to bid in real time. And until you have, a sufficient amount of load that can, sees a real-time price signal and can respond to it to address, the need, then what's the point of having the price signal, this sort of administrative price signal out there over and above what the market is saying? In other words, if people can't respond to the price anyway, because let's say the real-time markets aren't sending that signal out to load, how can it be just and reasonable to be charging these prices?
So we'll start with load. Well, actually, I'm going to start with, I'll call it demand broadly, because in the Schropp proposal, we sort of put the term things that consume demand in the market software bucketed broadly as load, storage charging, exports, pumps, things like this, anything that adds demand to the equation. And so as we relate specifically to load, I think the earlier question was sort of right on that. Well, there may be limited opportunities for us to be able to respond to, scarcity prices through, flexible loads. But part of the reason, again, that there may not be, a lot of flexible loads to respond is because the price signal is not sufficient to and motivate them to participate. And so, you may enable through scarcity pricing more customers willing to sign up for PDR type programs or DDR aggregations if they they may be more willing to participate in those types of programs and be able to rely on them as curtailable loads if the scarcity pricing provides the carrot that they need to participate in other types of things, for example. So it's sort of a what comes first thing where, is it the fact that we don't have scarcity pricing that means that we haven't seen, sort of robust growth of flexibly participating loads, or so I'll kind of leave it there and see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I guess my reaction is a lot of what the types of resources you describe are in the market, in the wholesale market. And so I could see, the argument that, okay, we got to get the right price signal for them to respond. But, and maybe I'll just tie this to the other comment I wanted to make was about the deliverability. I mean, I think that the true deliverability is when, you've got all these loads that are spread across the system. And if, a small percentage of them can respond and see a price signal, that motivates them to respond, then you've got deliverability without building a ton more transmission than you otherwise would need. But if you don't have that, then you'd have to change the whole transmission planning process assumptions about how much transmission you need to build. Like, what load are you building it for? Because you'd have to instead of planning to a 1 in 10 type conditions, it would be much more extreme than that. And our deliverability criteria that are applied today are already so stringent because we do it on a zonal basis and assume you can only serve you have to have enough resources within that zone to meet the needs of the zone. I can't imagine how much more transmission would be needed to have like a nodally deliverable product like this. And I guess I would say you wouldn't need it as long as to the retail level you were sending just the energy price signal would be enough. You don't need all the load to be responsive, right? You might need 5%, right, 10%, or maybe 20, I don't know, but
yeah, and we'll have some slides upcoming about deliverability that maybe we can think about some more. But I guess the sort of fundamental where it becomes relevant is sort of in where, like, at what granularity do you design a scarcity pricing mechanism, and that's kind of where we thought of it, because you could measure scarcity of the market footprint as a whole, you could measure scarcity as a BA, or kind of like flexible ramping product Nodal does. It creates BAA requirements that are distributed to nodes to enable locational prices. And so, you know, I'm not presuming to know what's the right level of deliverability or the right granularity, but these are just some questions we need to ask ourselves in terms of the design. Hope that context makes some sense.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks.
We also have a hand raised from Don. Please state where you're from.
This is Don Trethway from the California Energy Storage Alliance. I think the point that Doug just brought up is another justification for why you need a scarcity pricing mechanism, because you would not want to spend the amount of money on a transmission system that can cover, you know, every single possibility, and it's not even planned that way. Just because the economics would be, you know, so huge, it just wouldn't make sense. But if you had scarcity pricing, and you, again, were triggering to have either load voluntarily curtail, you know, have the LSEs call on load that's not currently modeled in the market. There's ways that you're sending those signals so that you can address the scarcity before it actually hits. And I would also note that you relax this. You know, you're not going to ensure you procure 100% of this, because if you procured 100%, you would lose the price signal that we want. That is, as the amount of you know, latent margin decreases, you want to see that price start to gradually rise. If you had to where you needed to meet 100% of the requirement, we're right back to the current AS scarcity pricing design we have that we want to improve upon. And then the other item on this is, you know, I think, you know, storage is load, and, you know, we don't want storage charging if we see that there's going to be these problems in the future. And you're going to start to see that where, you know, you can only bid to charge up to $1,000, and if the prices are saying it's over, you know, it'll get you to actually try to charge. So or not charge, which is what you want to do, because things are so tight and you want to make sure that you discharge at the right times. So thanks.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Doug. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Another core component that we want to discuss here is that the assumption that we made in the assumption that we made in the explanation of the two approaches assumes that the scarcity value is calculated inside of the market, and that through the co-optimization process. So the scarcity value is part of either some sort of reserve requirement or integrated in the objective function of the market, and the prices are an output of the market's, you know, mathematical problem, and the prices affect the dispatch and commitment of units in the market because the prices and dispatches are, you know, calculated simultaneously. And we think that's what you want. And there are you know, opportunities to make a scarcity pricing process outside of the market as sort of an ex post adder, where you're sort of running the market optimization and computing a scarcity pricing premium after the dispatch and adding it on to the prices and settlements after the fact. And in our opinion, that's not the path that we want to go down. because it sort of defeats some of the major point of the scarcity prices being in the market in the first place, is that they're going to effectively direct the dispatch. And so let's go to the next slide, please. So we think that calculating it inside the market has several benefits. It's going to give you the correct dispatch. You know, if you were calculating it outside the market, the market is not going to be able to see the scarcity price and therefore make a change in the dispatch, either by committing a unit earlier than it would have, or dispatching a unit higher than it would have, or curtailing a load, or awarding a demand response schedule, or decisions between charging and discharging. All of those things all require that the scarcity pricing be internal to the market software. And not only that, but when you're talking about over the Western footprint, you also would miss, all else equal. What you want is to be able to send the megawatts to where the scarce regions of the grid are. And you would miss that price signal if you were to compute the scarcity pricing after the market runs. Second here, we would be concerned about consistency between prices and dispatch, where prices that don't align with the dispatch may create incentives to deviate for units that would have wanted to run at the price that was settled, but didn't get an award. And so we'd be concerned about that. Also, that through the co-optimization of the market, the scarcity value flows through all of the purchased commodities in the market. Energy, reserves, it would flow into the intertie procurement, both imports and exports for the CAISO, and transfers between BAAs. And it also, importantly, for storage impacts, or storage and any other opportunity cost-based resource, is impacting the time-coupled decisions that the market, the multi-interval optimization, is making about when to start, when to charge you, when to discharge you, and how much and at what time. All of those things would be jeopardized by not having this be an in-market feature. And so wanted to present this as to make sure that this was clear what you would be losing if you didn't have it integrated in the market. Okay, let's get through, I think we'll have time to get through maybe one more question, and then I think we'll wrap up for the day. And we can pick up where we left off in the next scheduled working group meeting. Let's go to the next slide. The next question relates to, essentially, in our opinion, the margin that you calculate for scarcity pricing, either through reserves or through energy, needs to be time bound. It does not suffice, in our opinion, to just count the quantity of available bids, but you need to have some sort of knowledge about how much of that bid can be utilized by the market in the time frame that you're looking at. And so one question will need to be, well, what's the time frame that we should be looking at to determine scarcity conditions? And we don't have an answer to that question, but we do have, some considerations here for you to think about. If you design it to be too short, you're essentially leaving, you're in crisis mode. Anytime there's scarcity pricing, you're already in crisis mode. You may leave insufficient time for market participants to respond. If the price spikes in such a time frame where they're not able to modify their behavior or adjust their bids, then you leave insufficient time for that. The system might use up energy limited resources earlier than the actual emergency. So you might see scarcity pricing without a far enough look ahead may sort of drain energy limited resources earlier than you would have wanted them to. And so then in those cases, you're needing to rely on much more expensive options than using the energy limited resource, have you had them, or emergency actions, out of market actions, things like that. But then if the uncertainty time frame is too long, you start to degrade the sort of the price signal quantity because you know, over a long time horizon, the uncertainty is going to grow. And if you want to you know, reflect in the current prices the risk of not being able to meet load under some sort of really high uncertainty over a really long time frame, that value is just going to be really high, and there's going to be a lot of uncertainty about that. And you may get into cases where you can trigger unnecessary responses in the binding intervals now that end up not being necessary and end up in retrospect being overly expensive, you know, where you may sort of hold back low cost energy that you have access to now so that you can hold it for ramp later or hold its energy use limitation for later in the day. And then the event that you were worried about doesn't end up materializing, and you've made things in the interim more expensive. Or the market may be really aggressive and committing a bunch of units that it ends up not needing, and paying a lot of uplift and to start up those units that never run. And so we would like to try to find some sort of sweet spot between uncertainty, whether it's a new reserve product or whether it's an energy supply margin. You know, what's the time bound of the scarcity here? I think there's one more slide on this point. Next slide, please. Yeah, so some things to help think about the right window might be, you know, the resource response times in the market, the degradation of forecast accuracy over time as you're looking farther out. The uncertainty band around your forecast is going to grow. And then some things around the market structure, you know, for example, what are the look ahead horizons of the FMM and RTD? And how can that be utilized to provide the right time bound? How often are resources providing bids, and how often are we clearing the interties? Things like that to determine potentially how far ahead we should be looking. And then, of course, giving market participants the time that they need to respond to these events. And so, again, we're not suggesting any particular time, but something that we need to work through here. Okay, so with 3 minutes left, I think it's probably better not to rush through the last couple slides. So the discussion's been really good today. I hope this has been helpful. And what we will work on is scheduling the next session to have these discussions, and then putting together some comment templates so that, you know, we really want in between each of these sessions for folks to be providing their feedback. And one of the things that we'll be interested in hearing your feedback on is where, you know, in these presentations, could we be providing more detail for you to make the best, you know, give us the best feedback possible to how your organization, you know, feels about these changes. And so we'll work together to put that together. So Brenda, I think I'm going to call it at this slide.
Sounds good, James. Thank you so much. I did see Steve's hand, but if it's a quick comment, Steve, we'll go ahead and take that really quick. If not, we can always resume for the next session as well, as James mentioned. Awesome. Seeing no other hands, can we go, Ahmed, can you go to my last slide? Yeah, 25 actually. Slide 25. For reference, we did provide the presentations for both Steve and Callie's on the website for the price formation enhancements meeting. We also have if you have any questions on previous meetings, we provided an inventory with the list table with all the video YouTubes and also the presentations aligning for those meetings and topics. So you can go ahead and check that out. On slide 26, it's just Energy Blog Matters. We are featuring the latest blog we posted a few weeks ago. And then also we will be keeping everyone in the loop with a few updates this week. There's a few meetings kind of moving around. We plan to send out notices later this afternoon For one, most likely the storage design and modeling. That one will still take place on Wednesday. The time has changed for that one meeting for starting at 10. But you'll see that notice. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to myself or ISO Stakeholder Affairs. But we appreciate everyone's patience as we work to provide those meetings that are up to our deadlines coming up for this week. So we'll keep everyone on that notice, daily briefing communication. But thank you so much to James and Danny and everyone else. Thank you so much. I'll pass it to Ahmed to close our call. Thank you.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.